Hey, all you remote learners out there, how are you today? It's me, Mrs. Snook. It's a happy Friday. I was trying to make this video for you guys last night, but I had to go to the doctor and it just didn't happen. So, where this is going to be a little bit different than the lecture we're actually doing in class, because we're revising our Carnegie writing assignments in class, they've taken quite a bit of time working on that. So, you guys will actually be a little bit ahead in lecture than we really got through in class. So, I'm hoping by Monday that kind of evens out. But I figured for videoing purposes, I would just kind of move ahead. So today what I'm going to talk about is the next major industrialist of the Gilded Age. And we're going to focus today on John D. Rockefeller. And remember in the assignment that you did last week, which I'm still going to be grading, I've just gotten a little bit behind this week. So we've got John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and JP Morgan. So far we've talked about Vanderbilt and Carnegie, kind of wrapping him up as you're doing your writing assignment. And then we're going to talk now about John D. Rockefeller. That'll be our focus for today. And I'll talk about JP Morgan and then kind of lack of government involvement and how it leads to labor unions next week. So JP Morgan, he'll come later, but for now I'm going to focus on Rockefeller. And Rockefeller is the big oil tycoon. He makes his money through the oil industry. And when it comes to his role in the oil industry, you have to understand that when we're talking about the Gilded Age and the Second Industrial Revolution, oil is everything. Drake first drilled for oil and did it efficiently in the late 1850s. There weren't a whole lot of people who were doing it, in the early 1860s because of the Civil War. But post-war, the image that you're seeing on the screen was very commonplace for Texas. People were drilling all over Texas to see was there oil, and they referred to it as black gold, as Texas tea. Because if they found oil, oil could be used for the lubrication for machine parts, it could be used for kerosene lamps for lighting, and then of course, as you get into the 1870s, 1880s, you're going to see Edison come out with a light bulb in Menlo Park, New Jersey. And then we're going to see, by the 1890s, electricity kind of being the other big, energy source besides oil. But at that point, you're also going to be seeing the internal combustion engine come out, and oil is going to be used with gasoline, right, to power machines, to power planes, to power cars. So as industrialization continued during this time period from the 1870s to 1905, oil is going to become more important than ever before. And Rockefeller is the guy that you saw in the picture there, and he is going to be the one who dominates the oil industry. He is going to be the one who creates the Standard Oil Company. Sorry, I had to hit pause there for a second. They were doing the morning announcements and Pledge of Allegiance and all that, and I forgot about that before I hit record this morning. So John D. Rockefeller, he, unlike Andrew Carnegie, who grew up, Carnegie came to America as this poor immigrant, when he was 12, and he had a very difficult life and really kind of embodies the American dream. John D. Rockefeller's start isn't quite as humble. He isn't as poor by any means. It was more of a middle-class family. It was farmers. He grew up in Pennsylvania. He ended up leaving school, taking some business classes, saving up money, learned about business management a little bit. And then as oil was discovered in Texas and in Pennsylvania early on, he bought up land so he could start drilling for oil there and kind of got to know more about the business and started to invest in it, and over time became this business tycoon. Now his company, Standard Oil, will never be as big as Carnegie's. Carnegie will have the biggest corporation in the world by 1901, but Rockefeller will have way more money. Rockefeller, if you take a look at the political cartoon there, take a look at what he's holding. Okay, in one hand, he's holding the world to try to say that he is controlling it in a sense. And in the other hand, he is holding that kerosene lamp because he is providing people with a light source, right? Because you need oil to be able to do so. And you can see all the money bags kind of at the bottom of the picture, see those? And you can see kind of some of the poor people kind of in the background, and he could care less basically about all of them as he sits on his barrel of oil. And the thing to really pay attention to is look at his dress. He's dressed like a wealthy man, dressed in clothes of the era. And the most important thing, of course, is look at the crown on his head. And so he definitely is the king of oil. And that's definitely going to be true. During this time period, he will start to slowly but surely, buy up more land, have more oil, drilling sites, have more places where they refine the oil. And by 1879, 90% of the oil that is sold in America is going to be owned by him and his company, Standard Oil. And of course, we live in a society that is dependent upon oil. Many of you are learning to drive. Some of you may drive already. And you realize you got to put gas in your car. And as society will be becoming, more dependent on oil and gas during this time period, as they're kind of moving more towards cars and planes, he's just going to become more relevant and more important, and he's just going to make more and more money. So even though he may not have the biggest company, his product in a sense is more valuable and he makes more money from it. And my real focus for today's lecture is just to talk about this man and how he made his money, and to try to help you evaluate whether you think he is a robber baron or he is a hero. Now, I picked Carnegie for your writing assignment, I think I've said before, because there's so many arguments to support whether he was a hero or whether he was a robber baron. There's evidence on both sides. Many people often view Rockefeller as more of the robber baron, but there is evidence to support him as a hero as well. Now, the reason many people think that he may be a robber baron is because of how he treated people and how he made his money. Now, his employees definitely work just like the Carnegie employees, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. So we're talking about a 72-hour work week, which is insane. Very little time for rest and relaxation or family time. They only got Sundays off to be with their family. Incredibly low wages. Drilling for oil could be dangerous at times. And he really couldn't care less about his employees. He was all about work, just to try to, find more oil, refine more oil, sell it, produce a larger profit. Kind of like Carnegie, he was a penny pincher, watching where every single dollar was spent, hiring lots of accountants and chief financial officers to kind of oversee his spending, to watch his employees, to make sure you're not on too long of a bathroom break or drink break or anything like that. He's counting every single square of toilet paper that's been used, basically. Also, like Carnegie, he's a real innovator. He's always, focused on technology and the future and new ways to save money, new ways to improve production, to speed things up, to lower, costs, but also perhaps even to, improve quality of product so that he gains more customers and it's easier and faster and more efficient to refine it. And last but not least, the way that he really is able to make his money, it really has to do with his business tactics. And he is definitely a ruthless businessman. He will do anything it takes to knock out the competition. And as he knocks out the competition, it will basically mean that he creates a monopoly. Now, hopefully you're ready to move on at this point, and if not, feel free to hit pause. I was talking when we mentioned Carnegie that one way that businessmen make money is through mergers, right? When one company takes over another company. And these mergers or integrations, there's two of them. Remember, there's horizontal and there's vertical. And we talked about how Carnegie, for the most part, participated in vertical integration, where you're buying up the resources, the tools, the supplies that you need to basically sell your product. So Carnegie, he was buying up the coal mine and he was mining for shale and limestone and iron and all sorts of products. Then he was buying the railroad to transport the goods. And then he was buying like a factory where the smelting process, the Bessemer process could occur so the impurities could be taken out of the iron and steel could be rolled and refined and produced and sold. Now, that's not what Rockefeller does. Rockefeller participates in horizontal integration. And in horizontal integration, you're buying up companies that make the same product to try to reduce your competition. So really it's about oil refineries like you see in the picture, but we're going to focus it on as more gas stations because I think that is something that you have more experience with. So think about it this way. If Rockefeller owned, many gas stations in an area and he wanted to knock out some of the smaller local gas stations, like a Beck, so to speak. And he was the big, Amoco, Shell, whatever it may be. And he wanted to knock them out, or he wanted to knock out Casey's as a chain, whatever it may be. So if he wanted to get rid of the competition, what he would do is if everybody in the area was selling their gas at around $1.50, $1.48, $1.52, somewhere in that range of prices, he would come in and be like, all right, 99 cents. Now you might say, well, he's going to lose money. Yes, but he's also going to have a line around the block of cars. And so he's going to be gaining so many customers. His pumps will never be empty that he'll end up basically making up the difference, so to speak, so he won't really lose out on money. So other companies, in response to this, will do something where they're like, oh my gosh, we don't have any customers. He's beating us. So they'll drop their price as well. So now they're in kind of a price war, so to speak. Well, the other companies are not going to do well at this lower price because now that everybody has their gas at 99 cents, people will go back to their regular habits and the pumps won't be constantly full and they'll just go to whatever gas station is near them. So they're not really going to benefit from dropping their price. Rockefeller, in turn, might also decide, well, I'll drop my price to 95 cents a gallon or 90 cents a gallon or 85. And the other small companies, even a Casey's, which is pretty large, but it's just regional. You're not going to find Casey's gas station in Chicago or in California. They're going to have to eventually go under. They're not going to be able to continually drop their prices. They'll be losing money. They'll have to start laying off employees. They'll have to start to raise their gas. And then, of course, no one will go to their gas station. They'll continue to go to Rockefeller's. They'll lose more and more money and eventually go under. And right before they're about to go out of business and fire all their employees, that's when Rockefeller would swoop in and say, hi, I'd like to buy your company. I'll save all your employees' jobs. And so is he a good guy? I guess, in a sense, yeah, because he's hiring people. But at the same point, he did this to begin with. And he is basically purposely lowering prices, driving out the competition, and then he's engaging in horizontal integration to make his own corporation grow. And honestly and truly, it's sneaky, it's manipulative. And as you can imagine, now that he's pretty much the only gas station in an area, he has what we call a monopoly. He is the sole provider of a good or a product. And you can betcha that he's going to raise those prices of gas. I wouldn't be surprised if he's like, okay, now I'm going to raise gas prices to $1.60, $1.70, worse off than people paid to begin with. And unfortunately, that's how monopolies work. And if you think back to the lecture that I did, Monday of this week, I talked about how, especially in Carnegie's day, there were lots of mergers during the Gilded Age. And these mergers are great for robber barons. They're great for producers, for the people who own the company. They are terrible for consumers. They don't mean that they're going to make any more money. Now, during this time period, we need to talk a little bit about the business structure in general. And whether we're talking about Vanderbilt or Railroad Tycoon or Carnegie with steel or Rockefeller with oil, as their companies grow, the way that business is taking place is just changing. And what I mean by that is you don't really think that like a guy who's as wealthy as Vanderbilt or Carnegie or Rockefeller becomes the richest man in the world at this time with $1.4 billion back then, which would be the equivalent of about $400 billion today. Jeff Bezos, who's considered the richest man in the world with $99 billion. He's the head of Amazon. And I'm going off of figures from 2018 that I Googled. But basically, if Rockefeller were alive today, he would have 4 times the wealth of Jeff Bezos, just to put it in perspective. You don't think these rich men actually go into the factory and like oversee what people are doing? No way. So they hire guys like in that white jacket there who would be managers and also efficiency experts who would watch you work, as creepy as that sounds, to try to figure out how to save money and what they could do differently. They would hire accountants and chief financial officers to see where all the money was being spent, and just lots of like middle management. They would start to hire more female employees to be secretaries because Rockefeller's going to be, giving out all these directions and orders, so he'll want a secretary to take down notes. And remember, the typewriter is created during this time period, so women will be taking secretarial classes. Phones are going to be created, so only the rich have phones, but they would be making phone calls between, across the country, between wealthy businessmen to make deals and such. So the nature of business is kind of changing. And I say female secretaries because this was definitely a very gender-biased society where, women worked usually only until they were married in what they referred to as pink professions. So basically as secretaries, as nurses, as babysitters, as nannies, as teachers. But then as soon as they were married, it was basically this unspoken rule that they should basically quit working and go take care of their husband and their house and eventually have children. Now, this corporate structure, which you can kind of see in the picture here, really becomes more common. And I'll just go down just a little bit so you can see it. So if you were the average worker who's at the bottom of the chart there, you would go to work on a daily basis, 6 days a week. And then, of course, you would have some kind of manager who had hired you and who would oversee you. Who's probably middle management. This is kind of the beginning of a true middle class. For the most part, the Gilded Age is all about this big gap between the rich and the poor, but we're starting to slowly see a middle class emerging. That'll come about more into like the early 1900s and the 1920s. Then, of course, you get the vice president of operations, who's an executive, the CFO, the chief financial officer, and all these like business people who have more authority and actually make decisions. And they report to what's called the CEO, which is like your chief executive officer. That'd be like your Rockefeller or Carnegie. Now, as time has gone on, it's not just Rockefeller and Carnegie running these companies, even though we think about them as the head of the company, the face of it. They need people to help them run things. And so as the companies have gotten so big, there is a board of directors which has been chosen. And the board of directors is usually made up of people who have bought a lot of stock in the company. So remember, stock is ownership in a corporation. So usually the person who has the vast majority of the stock, the primary stockholder, he has 51% of the country, 51% of the company, the vast majority, would be like your Rockefeller, your Carnegie, your Vanderbilt. But the other 49% is going to be made up of, the rest of America. But average Americans might only buy 5 shares of stock, 10 shares of stock. I'm talking about like hundreds, if not thousands of shares of stock, so that they actually own a true percentage of the company, like 5%, 10%. Those people are now kind of helping running the company. I keep saying country. They're helping run the company, and they're part of what we call the board of directors. And the board of directors, honestly, is responsible to the shareholders. So including the average American, anybody who has bought stock in that company, the goal is to run the company manage it efficiently so that it makes money, and so that the stock prices go up, so that the shareholders, expect that if they sell their stock, they're going to make a profit. And that's just a picture of kind of what you see as far as the board of, trustees who would kind of help run things. And board of trustees is kind of a mouthful. And so they often refer to these boards of trustees as basically trusts. And basically the trust is kind of in these people and these boards of trustees who have all this stock in the company to run the company, to manage it, to help the chief executive officer, to help make money for them. Just kind of another document. I'm having a rough allergy day. I was like, we've got the board of trustees, right, who would basically be telling the company manager, so the CEO, your Rockefeller and whatnot, kind of giving him advice, who would then in turn be giving it to the vice president, the chief financial officer, middle management, who then passes it on to the employees. Now, just so you can get an idea why we need all these extra bosses, remember these companies have gotten very big because of vertical and horizontal integration. So just to be clear, if what you have is, if A, B, and C are the original kind of oil sites where Rockefeller owned Standard Oil in Pennsylvania, and he also kind of branched off to Texas. Remember, over time, they've bought up all those other small gas stations below. So they have all these, what we refer to as basically subsidiary companies. And so now Standard Oil is what we kind of have called it a holding company, because it has really expanded. It went from being just maybe one company to now 2 companies to 3 companies, and they bought up all these smaller gas stations, which you see with company D, E, F, G, H. So Standard Oil or Standard Oil Trust, this holding company, owns so many other businesses, and it's so much to keep track of. We know that Rockefeller owned forests and equipment and also engaged in horizontal integration, basically just to save money in the long run. So that's why they need so many people to help them run things efficiently. Now, as Rockefeller and Standard Oil are taking over all of these companies in horizontal and in vertical integration, there's all these mergers going on. And so what's happened is that he has created a monopoly. And you see my little Monopoly man in the bottom of the picture. I'm sure you've played the game of Monopoly before, and if you haven't, by golly, that's what you should do this weekend while having a fun and safe Halloween. But Monopoly, the idea is you buy up property, and you want to buy up the same property, so you buy up both of the light blues, both the dark blues, all 3 oranges, all 3 reds. Then you can build a house. You start off small, so then if somebody lands on your property, you charge them rent. And there's just the basic rent. Then there's the price for a house. And then you put up a hotel, and you can charge them even more money. And the goal, of course, is, to make the most money possible. And when you own the same colored properties, you have a monopoly. And now you're able to charge more money and more money and more money and have more of an income. And so you probably didn't realize it, but monopoly is actually like capitalism in its purest form. It's a great educational game for kids. It teaches a lot about our economy. And this is basically what Rockefeller is doing now that he has created a monopoly by through these horizontal and vertical mergers. He's raising prices of gas, of oil, and he's pretty much controlling how people are getting oil in America. Remember, 90% of the oil is coming from him. And I love this picture. This is a political cartoon, which really kind of shows it all. I'm really struggling with my allergies, guys. I feel like I'm going to cough again. Yep, there we go. So this, if you notice, is some kind of kraken, sea monster. Is he an octopus? Let me count his legs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I guess he's kind of like an octopus. He looks kind of like a kraken to me. I don't know, some kind of crazy monster. And if you notice, it's the standard oil monster, and it's got the oil refinery. It's got some like oil oozing out of it, but he's also controlling the globe, okay? And then look what's in his tentacles, okay? It's important as you're looking at political cartoons to look at the symbols and to look at the images and any words so you can identify the message of and the opinion of the cartoonist. So look, he is like controlling America, and that's like the White House, and that's the Capitol building. So the idea here is that he is using his money to impact politicians, and you bet he was. This is illegal. This is called graft. He is using his money to get his way in politics, and he is basically saying things like, I will give you $10,000 for your reelection campaign so that you get reelected president, or so that you get reelected to Congress, and in turn, I want to make sure that you keep corporate mergers legal, because he wants mergers to continue. Now, remember that chart I showed you on Monday? Eventually, mergers will become illegal. They'll pass a law called the Sherman Antitrust Act, which I'll tell you more about next class. But as they, mergers are still legal, this is how he's able to take over more companies and make more money, and it's in his best interest to basically pay off the government to do what they want. It's also why, when you think about environmental issues today, you might say, well, why hasn't the government pushed for, solar-powered cars, or I should say electric-powered cars, not solar-powered? Why hasn't that happened? Because Shell and Amoco and some of these big gas stations, they make their money through oil. It's in their best interest that cars continue to run on oil and gas because that's how they make their money. So they're kind of pushing to keep things the same in terms of fossil fuels. They don't want things to change. But we need to think in the long run. I mean, not in your generation, but eventually fossil fuels will run out and we will need another energy source. Now, just some more vocab term there. Ooh. Sometimes when I move the screen around, it gets mad at me. Sorry, guys. It's doing it right now. I'll go back. Apologize for that. It's a rough video today. But when it comes to, we're talking about these monopolies, sometimes people refer to the board of trustees who, run the company as a trust because they have the trust of the people. But they also refer to just the monopoly in general as a trust, which is why this, this large corporation, which is basically a holding company, is controls all these other gas stations and oil refineries and, just other factories that it needs in terms of horizontal and vertical integration. It refers to it just in general as a trust, which is why they call it the Standard Oil Trust. Now, we've talked a lot about how Carnegie made his money. And to kind of wrap up our lecture, we're about done today. We need just to talk about, is this man a robber baron? Is this man a hero? I don't know. There's evidence to support both claims, honestly. But in reality, like I said, he doesn't pay his workers well. He forces them to work long hours. At times it's, difficult. He basically pays off the national government. That all is kind of evidence that he is definitely a robber baron, and he is willing to basically be ruthless, get his competitors out of business just so he can have all the money and rewards. During this time period, we have a lot of journalists, people who write for the news. And as we're moving from the Gilded Age, our next unit will be on the Progressive Era, which will be focusing on the problems of society and trying to make America better. Journalists during this time period will get the nickname of called muckrakers. Because just like if you're raking up the leaves, you might rake up mud and, leaves and trash and dog poop. I mean, there's all sorts of nasty stuff that could be on your rake. So as they are raking up the muck, the filth of society, they're exposing the corruption and the problems and trying to let their readers know and make the world better. And of course, yes, they may have bias. You need to always pay attention to that as you're reading any kind of material and source and kind of be thinking about it critically. But ultimately, one of the most famous journalists this time is Edith Harbell. And Edith Harbell writes about this, and she's like, this dude is like a disease. You know, he conquers, he controls everything. And clearly, many other people agreed with her, which is why here's another political cartoon, which you see the Standard Oil monster, definitely another kraken, who's trying to control people, who's trying to control the oil industry, the railroad industry, the banking industry, homes, the government, the Navy, you name it. Anything that's reliant on oil and gas, he's trying to control it and control our society. And so yet again, all this evidence about his corruption. But because he has fantastic lawyers and they can't prove he did anything wrong ever, you know, this man never suffers from any jail time whatsoever. Now, on the opposite end of things, though, there is evidence he's a robber baron. He gives away $500 million to charities. He creates the Rockefeller Foundation. He helps found the University of Chicago, which is considered one of the great schools in the country. He gives money to hospitals, to churches, to libraries, to the homeless, to basically just improve all aspects of life. So he's a great guy. But remember, even after giving away $500 million, they estimate his net worth at that time was probably about $1.4 billion. And in today's money, that'd be about $400 billion when you're thinking about inflation. So we're talking about the richest man in the world. And if he was alive, he'd still be the richest man in the world. So basically, in a sense, almost the richest man ever. I won't go so far as that because we don't have facts to set it up. We have no idea. We didn't really keep statistics from ancient times of ancient Egyptian pharaohs and gold and things like that. Like there's not enough evidence to compare, but you see what I'm getting at. So there's support for both, but there's a lot of people out there who definitely think this guy is a robber baron, but there's people out there who think that he was perhaps not that bad and he did have hero qualities. And this last slide you don't have to write down, but this is what I've been talking about, just so you can kind of see wealthiest man in the world. Jeff Bezos, 99 billion. I think I quoted before 98. Bill Gates has 98 billion. Mark Zuckerberg, leader of Facebook, has 59 billion. In case you were wondering, our President Trump, he has about 3 billion, and these are 2018 statistics. And looking at the men of the Gilded Age, Vanderbilt had about 100 million back then, so it'd be about 205 billion today, so he would still blow the rest of these guys out of the water. Carnegie had about 380 million then, so that'd be about 372 billion in today's money. And Rockefeller had about 1.84 billion then, would be about $400 billion in today's money. So these men were still making incredible amounts of money, more so than anyone today. And you might say, how did they make so much more money? Well, they were the first to create oil. They were the first to create steel. And because, remember, they were getting away with it. There was no minimum wage. There was lack of government involvement because of laissez-faire capitalism. There was no regulation for safety conditions. And also because of lack of taxes. People do not pay income taxes yet. So that's the other way that they're so wealthy. All right, guys, have a great day. Later.